Okay. That's the microphone. Hello, everybody. Could we? Is the music off yet? Oh, now it is. Okay. Well, hello. My name is Carroll. I'm the president of the board of KC Jazz Alive, and I want to welcome you all. Thanks for being here. Give yourselves a round of applause. So we are streaming this today, and we're streaming it, Chris, on what?
Facebook.
On Facebook. So you just type in Facebook.
No, KC Jazz Alive.
KC Jazz Alive Facebook. So if you go to Facebook and you type in KC Jazz Alive, check this out, send it to your friends, okay? You'll probably notice that from now on, each session, we're starting to include a few selected panels from our Kansas City Jazz Legacy exhibition. And the reason why we wanted to do that, it was very important to begin to not only inculcate the panel sessions or the exhibit, part of the exhibit into our panel sessions, but do it in a way that gives you more awareness to a wonderful resource that we have at Kansas City Jazz Alive, and that's the Kansas City Jazz Legacy exhibition. So I believe Steve has passed out to each of you. Hopefully he hasn't passed out in front of you, but he has passed out to you a copy of basically a standard brochure about Kansas City Jazz Alive, and also a little bit of a flyer about how you can book this exhibit at your workplace or your school or your religious institution. It's really a great piece. And imagine, if you will, 17 of these beautiful banners up in your space, telling the story, telling the Kansas City story. If you want to see more information about the exhibit, we do have this exhibit guide piece, this exhibit prospectus up here. Feel free to come up and read through it. And also, if you want to take one home with you, you're certainly welcome to do that. I know we're going to bring up Steve Kraske here as our moderator extraordinaire. But before we do, I also want to take a minute to acknowledge all of our hardworking board members and our sort of collective staff at Kansas City Jazz Alive. Macy does such a great job for us, and Chris, who does our streaming here, and all of our board members. I believe Gail is here, Steve is here, and BJ is up there, I'm here, and of course, staff members, Macy and Chris. So if we can give it up to all of our board members and staff, thank you. So I know Steve's going to introduce this person, but there's someone who's really special in the room today. We're very fortunate that she was able to carve out time in her schedule to be here with us today in this panel session. And that's someone I've known for, has it been over 25 years maybe? Yeah, okay. So you were in your 20s back then. So it's been a minute. It's been over 5 years since I've known this young lady. It's unbelievable to see the kind of talent that she's created and made for herself over the years. Deanna has become one of the world preeminent scholars on Mary Lou Williams. You can ask her anything about Mary Lou Williams, where she lived, what color dress she wore at so-and-so recital, why she did the life tree, you know, right? Who she hung with after gigs, who she cooked for, right? I mean, but why she wrote the tunes she wrote, why she went into Catholicism. I mean, this lady is absolutely astounding. Not only is she a preeminent scholar on Mary Lou Williams, she is a fantastic vocalist and a fantastic piano player. And her fresh release, Force of Nature, right? Not far hot off the press, right? Was like number 1 on the jazz play, number 5 on the jazz playlist for how many? 10 weeks. Ah! Which is pretty cool. Yeah. In addition, she's a prolific author in terms of the kinds of article output that she does. She has 2 books now. This is one book. This is one book. See, I'm just throwing all kind of mess out there. Should just let Steve do this. But the book that she's just published on Liturgical Press is here today. And it's a beautiful piece on Mary Lou Williams called From Music for the Soul. Music for the Soul. Would you please help me welcome to the stage, all the way from New York by way of Pittsburgh, the lovely Miss Deanna Witkowski. And I just took all the pressure off of Steve Kraske because it was so important that we give her a chance to give us a chance to really shine a light on this wonderful, wonderful lady. She's going to be doing clinics around the city for the next several days. She was brought here by Kansas City Jazz Orchestra, who was scheduled to do a panel session at the Kansas City Library tomorrow.
3 o'clock tomorrow.
That has been canceled.
Oh.
That has been canceled. Did it change? Is it something you know?
No, I just was going to announce it for 3 o'clock tomorrow.
Oh, okay. So unless Steve knows something we don't, and it has been canceled because they're having a big service for Ida Macbeth at the Gym Theater, a celebration of life service, and they wanted to be respectful of that. So that session, unfortunately, is canceled. What that did is that gave us an opportunity to deploy her to other areas. So we're taking her there to work with the kids at the Jazz Academy. And we're going to take her Sunday to work to not only gig with the kids, the Kansas City area youth jazz kids at an event at the ArtsKC Casino, but we're also going to have a chance for her to sit them down and have conversation with them. So she's been gracious to afford us the opportunity to take advantage of the free time that's been afforded her by that arrangement. So our thanks to Kansas City Jazz Orchestra for bringing her here. So with that, someone that certainly needs no introduction, and that is your moderator extraordinaire, Mr. Steve Kraske.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Thank you. Well, welcome back to our final panel discussion on this whole idea of the scarcity mentality versus the abundance mentality in jazz. And the thesis here is that the pie is big enough for everybody in the jazz kingdom that is Kansas City, as opposed to a scarcity mentality, which suggests that you got to fight right now for every little scrap you can get, and there's not enough to go around for everybody. This is the third of 3, and we're going to be talking about this in several different respects as we go along here. Greg just introduced Deanna very ably. It's great to have you here, so welcome to Kansas City. BJ Jansen is my far left. He's a member of the board of KC Jazz Alive. Jazz became a thing for him at age 10 when his father bought him an alto sax and gave him the recordings of Jerry Mulligan and Charlie Parker. He had a very smart dad. He has numerous recordings out as a leader. He moved here in 2018. You all know Greg Carroll, president and CEO of Midnight Blue Jazz, also board president and co-founder of KC Jazz Alive. And the man second from your right, Brian Johnston, sitting vice president of the board of directors of the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra, now celebrating its 20th year as a nonprofit organization. He's a former corporate partnership sales manager for the Super Bowl winning Kansas City Chiefs. Let's give our panel a big round of applause for being here today. I passed out to all of you, I thought something that would be helpful. This chart that Bill Mullen, I think, put together after one of our sessions a year ago. And it's designed to sort of get at this idea of abundance versus scarcity. You know, BJ, I'm wondering what your reaction is to this chart as you look at it. Does it suggest to you that there's potential for an abundance mentality of the Kansas City jazz scene, or what does it do for you?
Yes, I do think there's a lot here. And I think it just draws the connections and how deep the pool is here and how much opportunity there really is with all the connections that we might not realize are already here.
I wish Bill was here. Bill's not here, is he? To talk about this chart in particular. Deanna, what's your reaction to it as an outsider looking in here a little bit?
Well, my first thought when seeing this, and I mean, I know a few of these venues, but not that many, is that I think in every locale, there's places to play that are not necessarily seen. And when I look at this, if I was someone coming here to tour and I needed to put a band together, and say I'm doing one thing I do a lot is I work in churches, I do a lot of sacred jazz. I would be thinking about venues that aren't here, like community centers and churches. And I also think about, you know, this is sort of a flat screen thing. Who has access to what? Does everyone have access, the same access to opportunities at particular venues? I mean, I don't know. And my suspicion would be the answer is usually no.
That's interesting. Brian, what do you think when you look at this?
Well, I'm not a musician. I'm just an enthusiast. So I don't know if my opinion is going to be very valid today, but I'll give it to you. I try and go see live jazz somewhere in Kansas City at least once a week. And I don't know where I'm going, but I look at the calendar, you know, the Kansas City Jazz calendar, and then I try and make my decision. But when you just first look at this, it says we've got a lot going on in this city, right? And let's think about what we have going on in this city right now, right? I think we're kind of in an abundance renaissance with the stuff that's happening in Kansas City. The Chiefs, obviously, excuse me. We've got the NFL draft coming here in less than a month. Something maybe we should discuss is what are we doing as a jazz community to take advantage and generate public relations and everything else for? Because what does Visit KC tout? Oh, Kansas City is a jazz town, barbecue, jazz barbecue. So I think there's opportunity there. We've got the World Cup coming in 26. Honestly, I think we've got pretty good runway here. That's my opinion.
You know, Greg, there seems to be a consensus here that you look at this chart, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of potential. I'm wondering what it says, if it does say anything about the potential for jazz artists to earn a living wage, which is kind of a separate question here. What goes through your mind as you look at this and think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Steve. I think, so when I see the dots, I think of the word eclectic. I think of the word opportunistic. I see the word possibilities, right? And the reason why I said eclectic mostly is that often people think jazz is a real myopic kind of focus, that jazz is only performed in clubs and only by certain musicians. But when I see this, I see students, I see influencers who are helping to engage those students and support those artists. I see venue owners, I see different places, not just jazz clubs, but I see, Harriman Jewell, where is that? Folly Theater, Johnson County Community College, KCK. I see all kinds of areas. So I see this sort of eclecticism, if you will, in the list, which tells me that there are financial opportunities for artists. I remember when I taught at CU Boulder, one of the conversations I used to have with my jazz ped class was students always had in their head this notion that I gotta go to New York. That's where I'm gonna make it. I gotta go to New York. And I would always tell them,
What are you
why?
saying, Greg?
I would tell them, I'd say, why? Why you gotta go to New York? Because that's the only place you can make it. I said, really? Why? I said, why? But you want to be a jazz professor. You want to be a jazz studies director, huh? Yeah, okay. How many colleges do you think are in New York? All right. So you think that all those colleges are going to have everybody come in and be director of jazz studies? I said, so what you need to do is find that right gig where you can find it and then make a scene. If they don't have a jazz scene there, make a scene, right? And so use the exposure that you have to venues, use the opportunities that you have, use your intellect that you have to form networks and partnerships and create a jazz scene that becomes economically viable, not only for you, but for other people. So when I look at a list like this, I see that potential.
BJ, this idea that we're all in agreement, there's a lot of potential when you look at this chart. Does it say to you necessarily that you can earn a living wage, based on what you're seeing here?
I think earning a living wage means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I would argue that jazz musicians in general are probably the first gig workers, pun intended, you know, and definitely with that creativity and creating the entrepreneurial state, you know, how can we create something out of nothing? We're doing that on stage, essentially, within some boundaries. So when I see it, it's really about reflecting what is the living wage. And then from your own mindset, where does that take you? What is that portfolio? I like to look at it in a portfolio aspect. So, you know,
what?
So that means it could be a lot of things. Maybe you're just not making all your money off of playing. Maybe you're teaching. Maybe you're writing books. Maybe you're writing code, doing apps. Maybe you're doing something else, but the music never dies. It's always there. It's always in your heart. So I would argue that the abundance, and this is going back to the word mentality and mindset, it really comes back to your mindset. And then how do we help those in the scene see the connections and the opportunity in a tangible way?
What percentage of the players that you bounce around with see our community as having an abundance mentality as opposed to a scarcity mentality?
Well, I would say, just from what I've seen, and especially for those that have come into this particular city, and I can speak for myself, there's a whole lot going on in Kansas City. And and quite frankly, there's a lot more financial opportunity here than there is in other cities that I've lived, you know, even on the East Coast, New York, Philadelphia. There's just a lot of people moving here, quite frankly, musicians, because of the opportunity. There's just a lot happening here.
And if I could just piggyback on that, I would say that so while there's opportunities, the big question I see is what's their mentality in terms of, is it a scarcity environment or is it an abundance environment? It, from my perspective, really depends on who you're talking with. Jazz musicians are like kitty cats. We all flock in packs, right? There's certain people that work in certain groups and go together. And there's a certain vibe that comes out of a certain group. Does everybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
There's a certain opinion or a certain attitude that comes out of that group. So some attitudes might be scarcity based, meaning y'all son of a, you know what, don't take my gigs, or this is mine and you can't have this, or I'm not going to share, right? There's that mentality, guys. I have to be real, because sometimes people like to sugarcoat it and think that everything is, you know, honky dory and everything is like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and it ain't.
Well,
there are some people who are the other way. And then in terms of abundance mentality, what I found is that the more advanced people are on the spectrum in terms of their ability level, the higher level artists tend to be more abundance type driven.
That's interesting.
Versus those that are scrapping on their way up tend to be more about scarcity driven.
You see it that way?
I do. And I think you're calling it what it is.
I had to be real, sorry.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if you fall into the scarcity mindset, it's a death spiral to the bottom.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You will manifest what you put in. And if you believe, right, that you can't do something or something's not possible, it's not possible.
It's not possible.
Yeah, I'd like to add something.
Yeah.
From my point of view, and I was on the board of the Jazz Museum for 8 or 9 years, and now I'm on the board of so I kind of feel like I'm in the scene, you know. Jazz musicians are the most opinionated humans I've ever met in my life.
Hey, what are you trying to say there?
I wouldn't give him that
And that's okay. And that is okay. But, you know, Greg and I had chatted last night, and one of the pieces of our discussion centered around wage, because when I often talk to musicians, we do talk about money, right? And I don't think gigs, and I'm not talking about private necessarily, but, you know, gigs at some of these places, and they haven't increased wages for some of these musicians since 1980. You know,
1940.
Or
I would
whatever it
say.
is.
1940, actually.
But whose fault is that?
Right.
Like how do you as a musician, I'm not sitting here telling you to unionize or do whatever, you know, but how do you say, wait a minute, I've got to develop a value proposition
Right.
for my art.
Right.
And if you want my art, this is the price tag for
Right.
it.
Right.
And then not for the venue owner to say, well, if you ain't gonna do it, he's gonna do it.
Right.
And if you ain't gonna do it, she's gonna do it.
Right.
You know, or whatever. I think there's some give and take here. Without a doubt.
Deanna, how do you deal with that in where you're living, Pittsburgh, New York? How do you deal with that?
Well, I have many thoughts going through my head. So I just moved to Pittsburgh 2.5 years ago, and I moved there because of Mary Lou Williams. I kept getting asked to go back there and do performances related to Mary Lou. In fact, I bought a house, and about 6 months after I bought it, I realized from findagrave.com that Mary Lou's grave was a mile from my house. So I really feel that she's been guiding me and she's been my mentor, even though I never met her. And that being said, when I moved to Pittsburgh, I partially moved there because I was having a different experience than I had in New York. I mean, I've always been, I hate this word, but whatever. I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always been finding my niche. I mean, I've been doing, jazz music in churches for 25 years. I have 500 churches that have bought my sheet music that goes with my jazz, hymns recording. I do Mary Lou's masses with choirs. I created the new performance edition of Mary Lou's Mass for that people license out to use. So, I do all kinds of things. And writing a book, by the way, doesn't pay that much money. Unless you're, yeah.
That's not what most people think. They think you're.
Oh my gosh. So I'll just tell you this, since we're being real. I mean, my entire advance, and I know this is being live streamed, so I won't say the amount, but it was under $1,000. So I blew through that living in Pittsburgh for,
2 days.
no, I mean, I went there for 2 months and I rented a room with people I didn't know because I needed to do research on Mary Lou there. So I've always been very, driven and direction focused. And I was watching an interview at the Schomburg Center for Black Studies in New York the other day. I was just up there for a week of gigs. And one thing Mary Lou said in this video interview really struck me. She said, if you are sincere and you really believe in what you are doing, you will find other people who will also believe in what you're doing. And they will support you. Now that doesn't even have anything to do with, to me, this schematic, which I think is great and very useful. Because what it says is, rather than being reactive, I'm acting from the inside out. I am creating. So, and it's freaking hard. I mean, it's very hard. So
You're putting it on yourself is what you're saying.
Right. Oh my gosh. If I didn't book my own gigs, I will tell you this, I wouldn't work in Pittsburgh at all. And unfortunately, there's very few pianos in Pittsburgh. Now, I've had super big support, like my record from Manchester Craftsmen's Guild, that's based in Pittsburgh. But what I really think and I suspect, again, that many local scenes boil down to this, is who are other musicians hiring? And if I come through town and I need to find a bass player or something because I can't afford to bring my band, it would be nice to have some kind of resource of so that I don't have to email 50 people I don't know to figure that kind of stuff out. So I think, having this is like a great start, even for people who are coming, say, from out of town. But I will say that while I was in New York, I was pretty much making my living on gigs that I booked myself out of town. Now I'm getting more gigs in town now that I've moved. So also I think because there's been, like, my book won the Jazz Journalist Award for Biography of the Year, won the ASCAP Award. I've been having a lot of publicity around that, but this was all like grit and hard work and doing it honestly myself.
Right.
So what I would like to see is something where, I don't know how this can happen, but, something where the, musicians, and I mean, kind of like what you're doing here, but I mean, it's something like money people don't talk about and except to bitch about it. Excuse me. I mean, really, jazz musicians all the time. Like, so I'll say this in Pittsburgh, like last year I got a call from someone who was, he was starting to book a new restaurant that's a chain. And I knew, because I had played at another outpost of this restaurant in New Orleans a couple times when I was touring there. And I knew that this restaurant in New Orleans and the one in New York had, baby grand pianos. So I asked, I said, is there going to be a piano? Because, I also didn't have a car. Now I have one. But, I didn't have a piano when I moved to Pittsburgh either. And so I said, is there a piano? He said, well, we're thinking about it. We're going to see. I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be a waste of my time, but whatever, so he calls me back a week later. Yeah, we decided not to have one. And, you got to bring your keyboard. So you got to pay for parking. Oh, I was like, is there any food? Oh no, we're not feeding the musicians. I said, you know what? No, thank you. But everybody else in town is playing there.
Yeah, they took the gig.
Yeah.
So.
And I don't do those.
So part of my point on that mentality, that scarcity mentality, is that to I think the question that you asked, Brian, or the statement about jazz artists having an opinion, is really very valid. And why is it that the wage is still the same? It's because it's several reasons in my mind. One is because we let it be the same, right? So my case in point example, when I first came to Kansas City as the CEO of the American Jazz Museum, one of the first things I tried to put in place was a summit of jazz artists that we could talk about market share wages. And we could come to an agreement. I called it like the jazz sit down, where let's have an agreement on what is the baseline fee that you will charge in this city. And why is it that I want to do this? Because many of you have been working for $50 a night, not an hour, a night, for decades, right? And you need to work for $500 a night for the next decade, right? And would you believe I got so much pushback I had to drop it? They didn't want to do it.
Pushback from the artists.
Not only the artists, but other people. I had a couple of board members, Brian wasn't one of them, that bitched me up and down about that. And I said, listen, and nor was Mike Gherkin wasn't one of them. I don't think you guys are even on the board yet. And he's the one that griped about it. It wasn't Elmer Jackson, but it was another board member who's passed away. And it wasn't Karen McCarthy. She was incredibly supportive of what I was doing. My point was this. I tried to get us to come together and agree to a baseline. And that means that if Joe Moderat's club owner comes to us and asks me to do a gig for $100, and no, I can't give you salad, and no, I can't pay for your parking, and no, I'm not going to give you an instrument, but I want you to play all this cool music and bring people
for background with people eating.
Right. And so we were trying to establish that as a baseline. The reason why I got so much pushback was then I'll never get a job. Right. And I said, you have to believe in the intent of this. This is to collectively raise the tide that lifts all of our boats. If we just raise it like this and this boat goes up, but these others stay here, then guess where they go?
BJ, talk to me. Brian says it's a value proposition. Greg's sitting here saying we can lift all jazz boats. Are you buying it?
It's outcome based.
It's outcome based.
Meaning, define that for me.
So it's what the market will allow, right? So we have created a situation where we have the race to the bottom, and it's a race to the stage, which causes the race to the bottom.
Meaning people will take a gig for anything,
It
just to be
is,
on the
and
stage.
I mean, I get it. I mean, jazz, playing jazz music is probably the most powerful, shall I not say drug, but
Aphrodisiac.
yes, emotion.
We can go there.
Emotion that there is, or feeling. I mean, it's once you get a taste of that and what it's like to create in the moment, that just doesn't go away. And as you progress as an artist, it's a two-way thing, right? So you have to have the audience as part of the equation. They're another musician. They're the other musician as part of your band, and that becomes the thing that just drives you. I've got to get in front of people. I've got to do this. I got to apply my craft. Unfortunately, then that also drives the undercutting behaviors and the race to the bottom and the scarcity mentality. And, to a business owner, hey, like if I can get this for $50, man, like, come on.
What
no
can this,
brainer.
what can this organization do to help with that?
I think the start is having this discussion that we're having right now and just talking about it and just bringing it to light.
Okay, and talking's good. We've been doing a lot of talking.
But we got to have action.
I'm just wondering, where do we go from today? What's the next step forward? I'm going to ask Deanna if what she's seen in other cities that has been helpful, if anything. Maybe the answer is nothing. But BJ, what do we do after today?
Well, actually, I heard an idea that I thought was sparked a lot of curiosity that maybe we could try again. Maybe it
Try it
was,
again.
maybe it wasn't something that could be achieved then, but maybe it's something now. And maybe that's part of the discussion is, hey, like we're just throwing each other under the bus. So
It's like El Chapo's in jail, so now let's do another sit down, right?
Well, Greg, to that point, maybe this organization is better situated than the American Jazz Museum to
Absolutely.
doing what you're talking about.
You know what? You are absolutely right. And in fact, Steve, that's exactly why we founded this organization, was because being able to do these kinds of things as the CEO of the American Jazz Museum, it lends to that notion of scarcity because everybody else, other venues, saw us as a competitor, right? They didn't see us as a convener or influencer or whatever the adjective, resource.
That's right.
They saw us as a competitor. And so by us, and that's why John McGraw and I started talking. And then we pulled in Steve Hargrave and Pam Hyder Johnson, which ultimately led to Kansas City Jazz Alive. That's precisely why. So and this all sort of comes almost full circle because Chris and I talk about this stuff. I was going to say a different word, starts with S. We talk about this stuff all the time, don't we, Chris? I mean, sometimes we'll be on the phone for 2 hours, right? And when we sort of landed on this idea of scarcity versus abundance, almost at the same intersection in a conversation. And I said to Chris, man, let's make this a series of conversations because this is excellent. So maybe perhaps as a board moving forward, and Steve has his hand up, maybe moving forward, this can be a part of some of the energy that Jazz Alive puts into the scene.
What you guys are talking about, guys, discussing, has application in virtually every industry in the American economy.
Without a doubt.
That is, are you a commodity producer or are you unique? Or you offer something that's definitely not a commodity.
Right.
And so whether you're in the fast food business, which none of us may think represents anything unique, but you think of Wendy's, you think of Burger King, you think of Taco Bell, you think of KFC, they've all got something that makes them unique. So I think what we're talking about is really, are we going to be about value or are we going to be about price?
You know,
in the absence of value, price is the determining factor.
That's right.
So Deanna was just going back to some of the things you said. I'm an entrepreneur too. And so, and obviously not a musician, but to hear a musician that is an entrepreneur is a breath of fresh air. Because in my experience with the musicians, you know, that are trying to earn a living wage, that are good friends of mine, you know, they're solely about the art, which is great.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
but they don't jack with the business side.
Yeah.
And you know, Greg and I were
They
talking about,
settle.
they sell. And we were talking about last night, we were talking about upfront communication.
Right.
You know, I'm in sales. So if I'm selling you something and, you know, I have a client and I teach them this stuff, but, you know, no one likes surprises. There's no negative in upfront communication, such as, if you're going to hire me, here's how I operate. You know, this is what you have to do. You have to provide me a meal. You have to blah, blah. No one's angry. There's no like, you're not doing it after. You know, there's probably some more the artists can do on the business side. And from a venue side, and I'll tell you that because I want you guys to make as much money as humanly possible. And when I have cash, which isn't all the time, when I go see somebody play, the only thing they have a tip jar. Well, I think the venues, and I've only seen it once, and when I was driving over here, I can't remember who did. When I pay with my credit card, I got to tip the waiter or waitress. Why can't I tip the damn band?
Right.
And none of them have that on there.
So Green Lady does that.
Do that?
We did that at the Blue Room. I made us do it at the Blue Room at the American Jazz Museum. Now, whether it stayed in place or not, I don't know.
It does. I was there.
Because I did get some pushback from my own staff on that. It does good. But the whole purpose was that, and this goes, I really appreciate your perspective, Brian. I remember traveling to New Orleans. I was doing some work. I can't remember. I think I was doing some clinic work. Anyhow, the brand new airport had just opened up in New Orleans. And so you remember this, Doris? We were coming out and we saw, oh, how cool. I hear live jazz. Okay, so you go down into the baggage area. There's a beautiful round stage, live jazz artists playing for freaking tips.
Wow.
Playing for tips.
That's the problem.
And again, there's settlement. We settled. So when the KCI project, they hired 5 of us to be art advisors for the new KCI project. So there were 3 visual people and 2 of us from the performance world we were really the visionists who thought about the kind of art that should be placed where it's placed at the airport. And I was the guy at the table doing this. I not only want them to see art, but I want them to hear art. It's important when they get off that plane that they hear jazz and they hear whatever other indigenous music to Kansas City is. So important. So, and that's going to be baked in. In fact, they baked it into some of the opportunities for the concessionaires. So, I mean, I know Soiree has a stage in her space. Someone else has a stage. So they're going to be presenting. So we can't minimize the music to street urgency. We have to elevate the music to business and fruitfulness.
And so this organization is going to do what? We're going to bring together the musicians and the venue operators, or what does that look like?
I think it's going to be conversation. I'd love to get Chris's perspective.
Chris, what are we going to do?
I think basically a catalyst organization is just that. I just had a conversation with Mike Gerken, who I've read his book like 900 times. And we were talking about infrastructure, and what I heard Steve talking to, what I heard BJ talking to, what I heard Brian, Deanna, Greg, they're all speaking to this business, this structure for the economy, a jazz economy. We have all the products and everything, but we do not have the infrastructure. And I think that KC Jazz Alive can be a facilitator in that. Like Greg's what were you putting together to put up there and give to one of the committees? You had some template that they could use, or something
like a fundraising template.
Exactly.
We talked about.
And the thing is, there's a lot of mentors in this room that I see. There's a lot of able people in this room. What Kansas City Jazz Alive can be is a broker of that information and a resource that brings people together. Like if a venue doesn't know what a living wage is and they want to have live music, we should be able to give them what union scale is, because that's relatively valid if you look at where to start. And if an artist does not know how to build a business plan or something like that, we could have templates, we could have the resources there for them. That's a lot of musicians I know, particularly young ones. We're working with young musicians in Kansas City or youth dev. And these are the young artists who are going to be the next generation, high school and college students. And they actually are out doing performances as part of that program so that they know this process. They're just not doing a gig for a sandwich or, yeah, I got somebody's band.
Well, I was going to say, to Brian's point, we've got an issue if some significant percentage of our musician population has no background in entrepreneurship. They're just, all they're focused on is the music.
Right.
Then we got a problem. I mean,
Right.
Yes.
that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I
That's what
think,
was talking to Mike Gerken about, having people like Mike or Craig or BJ, Brian, Deanna come and speak to actual musicians. And they see someone tangibly living like an adult, you know, and they're still an artist. And they give you the reality, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was coming up, I was in the Army and I was on the outside looking in. I had this fantasy of listening to albums with my friends and of what it would be like to be a jazz musician. And then when you get out and you see that there aren't that many places to play, the pay doesn't work. So how do you make this work? And if you don't have people who are actually making it work, telling you the reality, and someone's telling you a marketing hype pitch of what it is to be it, you know, everybody's got their publicists and all of this stuff, and they make it present, they make New York better than it is. You know, they don't make it the rat race and the dog eat dog it is. So I'm saying we could be reality. If you're going to make a living as an entrepreneur in this country, it's competition. It's about that. The cream rises to the top. Yes, we understand that. But most industries where you compete, you have infrastructure, and then you can be an entrepreneur. We don't have infrastructure. Since the unions got blown up in the 80s, there's no infrastructure. There's nothing going to a pension fund. There's no.
Unless they do it on their own.
Unless they do it on their own, but they don't know to do that. They're being lured to jazz studies programs to study with jazz great so-and-so, and you're going to be like.
That's where I was
Right.
going.
Right.
So like, maybe that's another thing we could help out with,
Right.
at least
The reality.
locally.
Tell them the reality.
I mean, yeah, I think the the commercial acumen, right?
Right.
Most folks aren't exposed to that. If they go through a jazz education program, they think they're going to be the next Charlie Parker,
Right.
Whoever their teacher was.
Right.
or their teacher or whatever, and then they get out and then reality hits.
Taxi job becomes more realistic.
Right.
Right.
And I do see more and more programs that are incorporating some of that. But I think there could be, you know,
Synergy.
more partnership,
Yeah.
you know, where maybe our organization could work with some of those groups and
Yeah.
we could come in and kind of have an outside voice. Because I think, you know, as a product of music school, when you're that age, if you hear it from your professor, it means one thing.
Right. Right.
If you hear it from somebody coming in from the outside, it can mean a whole nother thing, you
Right.
know,
It's
so.
like,
Well, how open is the UMKC Conservatory to this conversation about the need to incorporate entrepreneurship into the curriculum, which is the big word we tend to use in higher
yeah,
education?
I mean,
Curriculum.
I think there's potential.
You got the president.
We have the president here, so let's have that conversation. Let's have that conversation. But here's the deal, with all of this stuff, building an infrastructure, having these conversations, we also need to help shape or shift the paradigm thinking. Now, what am I talking about? So Jazz Alive before has created sessions called Musicians Helping Musicians. Those sessions are all about showing people how to do taxes, how to invest. Remember all that, Doug? Right? Remember all that stuff? How to do marketing, how to build a website. We had to cancel it 3 times because we couldn't get people to sign up.
Wow.
Right? And so if I would ask someone, well, why didn't you go there? Oh man, I don't need that shit. I know what I'm doing. And this is the first person that immediately out their mouth is they're griping at Jazz Alive because we're not getting them gigs. Well, we just tried to give you a fishing pole and show you how to get in the water. And the first thing you said was, I don't need no damn fishing pole. I'm already cool.
But see, that's a warped
And it's a warped perception.
Scarcity.
It's also a scarcity mentality. So that, of course it is, Chris, you're right. It's ignorance. So we have to help shift that in order for these sessions that we do through partnerships or redo through re-ups has the kind of impact that it needs to move the needle.
Well, a couple things here. Deanna, any city outside of New York that you're aware of that has figured this out?
I mean, not that jumps to mind.
Okay.
But a couple other things have been jumping to mind. So I'll share. You know, one thing I think of is that I sometimes go and see jazz groups where I think, do they have any idea that there's an audience here?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're just out there like, you know, like, and showing off to each other and whatever. And that's fine to a degree. But I really think that one thing we haven't said so much, but maybe we're saying in an indirect way, is that I view a lot of my work as building relationships. And a lot of that takes, I mean, years, decades, you know, so there's a difference between going into a room and just playing my music because I think it's the shit, you know, and that is a different attitude than trying to share because I have something to share. And I want to, you know, receive something back from the audience too. And I try to never assume that I have any idea who's in the room. I mean, unless I know who they are, you know, so because I've had many times things happen, you know, someone comes up to me with some idea about something that I wouldn't know because they wouldn't be on, you know, the list of venues. They might have some other opportunity. And so I kind of feel like, and again, you know, just to go back to, I mean, Mary Lou Williams said jazz should be played on the sidewalk, in the church, in the community center, in the school, and whatever. Now, is it? I mean, if we think of venues as being, you know, specifically music venues, or, you know, sometimes restaurants or concert halls or colleges or whatever, there's a lot of other places where people live their lives and they may not be jazz aficionados because they haven't heard the music. Right. You know, exactly. I mean, I do so much stuff, again, just because this is my background, I do so much work in churches and people are like, wow, I didn't know I liked jazz, but I love what you did. And then they sign up on my newsletter. They've been on my newsletter for 20 years. And then when I needed to buy a piano, my fans gave me $25,000 to buy a Steinway. I mean, but that didn't, you know, come from being like, this venue, you know, like just, right. Man, like, why am I not getting hired from the whatever? And yeah, I get that way too. I mean, there's lots of places I think this is crazy why I haven't gotten a gig at this place, but I can't, you know, I can't operate that way. The other thing I think about too is the times when I have met with intentional groups of small groups of musicians to share information among ourselves, that has been very productive. So sometimes it's, you know, and I'll say it, you know, sometimes there's some gender issues and really, I mean, you know, and if you're not sitting at, you know, whatever, the bar with the guys and hanging out at a certain time, you're going to miss out on opportunities. It's true. I mean, and so I sometimes find, you know, if there's like-minded people I can get together with and we can just talk and share information so that, you know, we don't have to find out the hard way from a venue that perhaps treated someone poorly or something. I don't know. I'm just kind of making this up.
Maybe the information that Greg tried to impart through Jazz Alive or whatever, maybe it comes better from musicians.
Oh, I'm not saying better necessarily, but I think there may be some things that maybe musicians will share among themselves that, you know, maybe they're going to be a little nervous to share another situation.
Okay, yeah, you know what? Okay, so check this out, guys. All right. There's 3 people here that are on the board of directors for Jazz Alive. Chris Burnett, BJ Jansen, and Greg Carroll. Every last one of them are jazz musicians. We can talk 251. We can talk business spreadsheets. We can talk jazz history as deep as any other jazz artist can, right? So for someone to even imply, and I know you're not saying that, and I know you're not either, but to even think that the only way this information can transfer from one to another is in this sort of sacred, hallowed environment is bullshit. I'm sorry. And I got to tell you this, guys, I would really like to hear perspective of people like Jim Wetzel. And I would really love to hear perspective of people like Doug Rushing, who may not have a musical bone in their body, but damn, they got an incredible mind on their head. And that's something that I can benefit from as a jazz entrepreneur. Does that make sense, y'all? So again, this siloing, this fragmentizing.
And I wasn't trying to say silo.
Oh, I know you
I
weren't.
was saying, like, you know, and I will say this, how many times have I walked to a venue and I'm if I am, God forbid, carrying my keyboard, and I get asked, oh, are you carrying that for your boyfriend?
For someone. Yeah.
Right.
No,
That's
yeah.
the kind of stuff that sometimes I think.
No,
you know,
Deanna,
there might
I'm
be
not
other
saying that you're saying that. I'm reacting to the fact that it happens.
Sure.
Well, let me,
That's what my reaction is to. It happens. And that stuff needs to change. And that's where we could have your help as well as ours of doing a better job of lowering some of that temperature, raising some of that welcoming dust, if you will, so that the conversations can ultimately be more kumbaya. Does that make sense?
well, let me try to be non-kumbaya for a moment. You know, in my world, the Kansas City, my former world, the Kansas City Star is now unionized.
Right.
St. Louis Public Radio, the newsroom, the other sort of world I occupy, unionized. I don't know what's going to happen at KCUR, but BJ, I guess the question, we've been sort of dancing around it here a little bit. Why not unionize? And what does that do to the ecosystem here?
What has it?
Well, yeah, precisely. So I have been a member of the union before.
I still am.
In multiple cities, and did nothing for me.
Because why?
There were no opportunities that became of it. There were no, it was basically one way. You do the gig, you get the gig, they take a cut. And then there was a lot of control. I don't think that's the answer. And you know, I think it really just comes down to the mindset again. It's just, you know, you can't help people that don't want to be helped. So maybe it's connecting with the people that do, and let's help them.
See about their ship rising, and
Yeah.
hopefully that spillover carries over to those that are a little more poo-pooing.
Right. I mean, it's really that simple. I mean, you're not going to win everybody.
Right.
You know, you're lucky if you can get the majority. And, you know, one of the things for me personally, I've taken another whole professional career outside of music. And, you know, if I didn't have a growth mindset, yeah, I would just be, you know, not living like an adult, as Chris says. And,
You know what that is? Cold. You know what cold that is? Not
yeah.
having to eat top ramen and living in some small 1.5 bedroom apartment, right?
Yeah. You know, and that goes back to the first comment. One of the first comments that I had was, you know, based on your question, living wage. What does that mean? That means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
That's fair.
That's right.
You know, a $50 gig, that might be a living wage to somebody. Top ramen, that might be okay. That might be cool, you know, but it's really about reflection. And I do agree with you, Brian, on the jazz musician opinionation. So yeah, I think a lot of times the lack of the growth mindset sometimes gets portrayed as arrogance, and then it turns off those who aren't in the scene that do have value to add. and want to help, they're like, no.
Caution sign.
I like, yeah, like it's like a blinking red light and you're like, nope, 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 I don't have time for this.
Right.
You know, you go back into your deep dark hole and have fun with that, you know? So I think it really goes back to what you want to make of it. And I don't believe unionizing would be the answer at all.
Okay. So some tactical things. I mean, we can certainly increase some of our presence on our website. We can do some of the more tangible tactical things that help to provide a presence and awareness of what we're trying to do. If we do events like this, we can definitely contribute there. Where we're also going to need the help is how to, I love this term with Deanna sitting next to me. I always use this term. There's folks that are churched and there's folks that is unchurched. And I'd love for us to get more of the unchurched folks churched, right?
That's always the
So,
challenge.
so how is it that they do that? It's every, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to stop you because once I start talking.
Go ahead.
So.
Can you say your name?
I'm a member of the League of Women Voters.
Ah,
And I just wrote an article for our April newsletter coming out because April 30th is International Jazz Day, right?
right. Mhm.
Okay, so in the process of doing this, I'm reading, I'm trying to get a handle. I mean, I've played classical music since I was, third grade. I'm terrible, but I love it, So just wrapping your head around, and I've been reading Nez Nesro's book. You probably are familiar with that, and trying to understand how Kansas City's jazz is different from St. Louis jazz, where St. Louis had the Germans and the Catholics and all of that, and Kansas City was so unique in that we have that incubator here for a number of years. What I love about going and hearing jazz musicians, I love their stories. And for those musicians who are willing to share the nitty-gritty awful stuff, that's what I love, because I can relate to that awful stuff in my life. And I think that is what has been so great about, jazz music anyway, is because we see musicians interacting with each other, and they respect what somebody else has played, and so they build off of that. And the idea that it's such a vehicle of communication and connection, I think a lot of people don't understand it. And if they were to understand the value of it, I mean, this little newsletter is going to go out to our 300 members. That's about 3 times that many. This League of Women Voters, remember the August election with the whole abortion thing. And okay, that was a little thing. And we were down in Tucson, and I talked to somebody in a museum. There was a little display about suffrage, and just a random conversation. And we started talking about, women and suffrage. And my gosh, they knew about what had happened here with, the whole abortion vote and everything. It was a small thing, but the word spread, and we understood that the idea of going to a small venue, and just sitting and talking with people and hearing the stories of musicians and the way that they bring soul to me is so inspiring. I think that is, if we can build our audience and share that kind of thing, that's what you guys need, right? You need our clients. We have a couple of friends out, and we met them at the Black Hawk, and they live in Independence. They will have a small group come in, and there are about 30 or 40 people there. And that tip jar is really cool. That's in a house. That's not on this list. But how many other people wouldn't be? I've got a grand piano sitting in my front room, and I would love to have some people come in. I know I can get a bunch of people come, so, but do I know anybody in musicians who would be willing to come and do that? I don't know.
So can I say something, a couple things I thought, oh no, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I mean, as an outsider to the scene, I would say that would be one thing that perhaps this organization could do, would be a sort of a clearinghouse for maybe you to contact and say, I really want to have like, a pianist in my house for a house concert. Do you have any ideas who, it's also, again, I think about building, deeper relationships beyond the music or other ways to enter into the music. Because even if you know nothing about jazz, if you know something about somebody's story, you're going to be more interested in it. I teach right now at University of Pittsburgh for on Friday's jazz history class, and it's kids who are not music majors. So, their perception for many of them when they come in the class is, I don't know, maybe this is music my grandparents listen to or something, or, they have sort of no way into it, but I try to give them a lot of different ways to help them to listen like a jazz musician. That's sort of my goal with that class. Like, I don't care if they remember everybody's names, but to have a way to enter into the music more. I also keep thinking, one thing I've done a lot of is try to look at other fields. So I've watched a lot of documentaries about like women film directors and their struggles, or things like that. Like sometimes looking at a different, like just reading about stuff in another field, I think kind of broadens your own vision about things that you can do, because you get ideas that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
And if you guys haven't heard, this young lady wrote a book. I know I told you earlier, I'm really just.
How much are they?
Afterwards, $20 for the book, $20 for the CD. I'm gonna be shameless promotion. I will be here just for a minute. She's got to whisk off to KCK Community College for a clinic, but I will be here. Deanna has several signed books there. The kind of insight she just said is what's written in here. So I would highly encourage you to pick up a copy.
Where's Pablo?
He's just on
Pablo?
Facebook. He's saying that to put together a solid musicians union is the beginning. The rest is just cheap talk.
Yeah.
That's on our Facebook Live thing. What other steps?
Wait,
forward?
hold on. Okay, so Pablo, send a follow-up to your,
There's another remark on that.
yeah, I'd like for him to follow that up. What is the just cheap talk? I want that defined, because that insinuates a scarcity mentality in terms of the attitude of what the organization is.
That's right.
So I want to know what the hell you mean by, and I think this is Pablo Santafazo.
Yeah.
I want to know what you mean by cheap talk. What is that? Because that's an insinuation. And I know I may be appearing very defensive, and damn it, that's okay. But I want to know what that is. So let's get it out, man. Let's get it out. Let's be real, and let's smooth it out so that you become a player with us and not a player against us.
He also wrote, as an artist and band leader who brings consistently a full house to my concerts, I'm ready for that $500 per man you speak of. Who's pushing back now?
I don't know what.
That's organization.
Yeah.
Steve, you mentioned that about union and what union brings to the table. My brother was a member of 802 for like 30 years. He lived like a grown up in New York City.
Yeah.
And when he retired, he actually retired because his pension fund gave him, in addition to his Social Security, he was able to live in Honolulu. So what I think infrastructure is for the jazz musician is what a living wage is. Like if you go to a club and this club pays you $50, this pays you $20. Like this guy packs a house and he gets less than $500. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
So-
there's no organization.
Yeah, I mean,
But we also set our prices.
yeah,
That's
what-
right. No
And we settle.
organization. That's
So-
what he's saying.
yeah, and unions, in my mind, were relevant at a certain time, more so in history than maybe they are now.
No, of course. After 1988, it was
So-
relevant.
But that's
And this is more so
for
for music unions than
Music.
other kinds of.
Music, yes, thank you.
Okay.
That affected all of it.
I think
So,
some unions and other genres or other industry segments are very strong. Whereas some unions in music, some unions in the arts are strong in certain
Yeah.
areas. For example,
It can
the
work.
Folly
I guess what
Theater,
I'm saying
the
is-
union that they work at the Folly Theater is a great union, right, Gail? Would you add to that?
Absolutely. We feel like those individuals who are part of the union, who are 7 people lighting, stage managing, they bring so much experience to the table, and they also are there for every show.
Right.
So we're not pulling in different people each show, which is something that other venues do. So they develop relationships with the players, and they want to make them sound good, but absolutely, the unions work really well for the Folly.
So maybe there's some, in terms of BJ's point, maybe there's something to this notion of synergy or partnerships. Those unions that are strong can work together with us if we have
That's
jazz
right.
artists that want to have a union. So let's learn what are the things that you've done good that work that we can model, right? But my point to the pushback, and Pablo, you know I love you, brother. I know we're on Facebook. You know I love you, Pablo. You know you and me, we're real, baby. But I gotta tell you this. You also settle. If you want $500 for a man, ask for it, require it. Either they pay it or they don't.
We can meet anytime, he wrote, and I can tell you with a PowerPoint.
Perfect.
Okay.
Let's meet, brother.
Well, as we begin to wrap up here, what else? What other concrete steps we looking at here? Yeah, go.
I'm playing a big band. I've been playing with them for 18 years. Been around the Kansas City area a long time. We currently have 14 people in the band. One thing we learned on how to make money is that you have to desegregate your music. I mean this sincerely. We had swing music, we had Glenn Miller. You know what? We had to get theater music. We had to get jazz. We had to get a bunch of different varieties. We have 200 stores. We give them to our clients and say, which out of these would you like for us to perform? You choose what you want. You've heard our reputation, choose what you want. And based on what you want, this is what it's going to cost. They have no problem with that. They pay us up front. We did one of the nice things, we did the military for local Glenmore, their veteran celebration. And we played every style of music under the planet that day. But everybody in that place enjoyed what we did. We introduced them to, Take the A Train. We introduced them to Patsy Cline. We introduced them to all different venues, but we did it through swing and jazz as we played. And it brought people to tears when they heard the Wizard of Oz theme theater, New York, New York. We know that if you draw your company in, they will bring you back and they will pay you.
BJ, is that the answer?
That's the value. You provided value.
You have to have a client relationship. And if you're going to go union, you better have a client relationship through the union with different venues.
Right, exactly.
You need to play music that's not musicians' music, because if you play musicians' music, you have a forum for musicians to come listen to. But other than that, you better simplify it and draw your crowd in so they feel like they've got an experience that they can relate to.
Miles Davis used to say, know the room, know your room, know your room.
But that's how we survive.
Yeah.
I'm not a musician. It's great knows. I want to tell you about the most important thing that ever affected my life professionally. In college, we had a visiting lecturer. He told us about Louis Pasteur, the great French scientist, who said, fortune favors the prepared mind. And you prepare your mind and you listen to other people and you take on your own responsibility. We drink pasteurized milk today because Louis Pasteur had a prepared mind. And you can help prepare people's minds, and you can encourage them to prepare their own mind. And that's what I've tried to do ever since that time I joined in college.
Yeah, it's nice.
I took lots of notes, by the way, everybody. We'll definitely talk as a board.
Chris, what's going through your mind here?
I think that I derailed what you were talking about with the union into some other thing that I wasn't talking about. The thing that I'm talking about is infrastructure and organization. The issue that I see with most jazz musicians, like the gentleman back there amplified it, BJ called it value. I call it that he's organized. He's running his business like a business.
Correct.
He's doing the things
Right.
that he's supposed to be doing. He's doing what Brian does at sponsorship focus.
Right.
He's got his stuff together, so when somebody approaches him, he has a package for them. He knows what he's worth. He knows what he wants. He knows what his price points are. When I do a quartet, I'm gonna have a concert on the 28th. I'm plugging it, but I'm not gonna tell you where it is, so I don't fully plug it. But actually, when I go there, they're not gonna pay me until I get there. But when my guys are there, I have an envelope for them before they play a note with their money in. So I've got to subsidize that before I get reimbursed by the client. So I've got to be a business person. A lot of people want to lead and they don't understand the parameters of that. And that's why I was mentioning Mike Birkin and I'm putting on the last again, like the type of mentality that it takes to engage that along with the notes. You know, we spend so much time learning the notes. All you guys know what they play. It's hours long, and you get to this level, you forget that, okay, you've got that, now how do you want to live? That's why I stayed in the military jazz bands for 22 years, because I have healthcare, I got a wife, I got kids, I can do my music, and then when I'm done, I'm less than 40 years old, and I can still do this. But you don't have to take that route. There are different routes. This is America, and it values, the young lady was talking about how the music touches her, and it touches her because she's American and all the stories come from us. And that's what makes our music unique. And it's a value that the world values. I'm just saying that we should value the same thing and then collaborate with these great business minds who are sitting around here and know how to do a business plan. You have this, let's bring it to market. Ask Brian, ask Mike, ask Doug, ask Gail. She's run a jazz series probably since 1981. I think they've been going successfully. So it isn't a problem with the product or the artist. We're not telling them what to do or how to do. We're just saying there's this big side that's missing. The infrastructure is missing. Like the clubs, they're trying to pay their rent if they don't own the building. They're trying to pay the electricity. It's pretty expensive, really, relative to speed. What we have to do is make sure that we're coming at them as entrepreneurs and business people. And you just don't learn that without mentorship or an example. And you got people who are successful business people that you can ask, but you don't know to ask if you don't know that's an issue.
And I'm glad to hear that. So BJ led to this. He said, you know, there are just some people that just don't want to be trained.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we're not talking,
No, but let me just state my point. I think that to that point, what I'm excited from this session today, even from the exchange with our friend Pablo, is there was this change occurring. Even in that discussion, you notice that the change, it went from very stern to, yeah, let's sit down and talk. I have PowerPoints. Great. Let's have that conversation.
we ought to have him.
You know?
That's right.
Doing some stuff. I mean, we ought to have him come and present and give that perspective because he's out there doing it. He's been doing it since I've been back home 20 years, you know? And to have his input or artists like him and his generation involved, like that's why it's great to see DJ up there. He's of that generation that they're on the tip of the spear, you know?
So Pablo, we're inviting you, participate, synergize with us, brother.
Okay, final comment from Brian. Do you have anything you want to say? You can listen to this?
Yeah, I think that as we move towards a greater abundance paradigm, and I see this in what I do on a day-to-day basis, I don't think there's ever been a better time to be from, live in Kansas City.
Amen.
And you know, you got Travis Kelce hosting Saturday Night Live, and you got, I mean, you have the NFL draft. There's so much. It is a sexy thing to be in Kansas City.
Right.
And I can tell you from the corporate side, you know, jazz is Kansas City, and these corporations want to be involved in that stuff. And again, that's a whole nother discussion, but you know, there's probably some tremendous opportunity in the next 3 to 5 years.
That's so true.
For this group.
And I would ask not only people online at Facebook, but you guys here, there's been some really good ideas broached here, and we want to hear them. Now, can we do them all right away? Probably not, but we want to hear them. Send them to us. Go on to our website. There's a form right there, Macy, where you can enter your input. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us what you think we should do. React to this session. Give us your feedback. And it's okay if you say Greg was an asshole doing anything. I'm okay with that. That's all right. I just want to know, what do you think? You know, give us some thoughts, some feedback. So yeah, that's fine. I mean, all I know is that I remember Freddie Hubbard telling us once in the clinic, remember there's 3 registers on your instrument. There's a low register, there's the high register, and there's the cash register.
Yeah, there you go.
That's what drives a brother, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Lou Williams, Music for the Soul is available right there. Let's give Deanna, Brian, BJ, and Greg a round of applause for coming to visit.
Thanks, Steve Kraske, guys. Really well done today, Steve.